All right, man, peace. You know, brothers, I stated a very long time ago that this entire Colin Kaepernick narrative, as well as the new Eric Reid subplot, was really only an attempt by certain powers that be on the Marxist side to try to socially engineer society through the NFL. They were trying to force this big cataclysm between the woke NFL players and the owners to try to bring a lot of Luciferian ideologies more into the forefront of the NFL so that they could try to utilize the NFL as a proxy agent to change society, because the NFL is the most popular sports league in America. They already have the NBA. So that's why they don't really mess with the NBA. You're not going to see any NBA players getting down on one knee because they're all actors anyway. Steph Curry, LeBron James, Kevin Durant, they're all actors. And not even necessarily consciously. But every last one of them is going to put their money first. And since they know that their contracts are pretty much fully guaranteed, they don't have much to be upset about. The NFL players have put forth this image, this facade of being woke and trying to change society, when the main thing that they want to change are their contract situations. They want their contracts to be fully guaranteed, and that's never going to happen because the overall tenor of the NFL is completely disparate from the NBA. Just inherently, the NFL is a collision sport. Now, the NBA is a contact sport. And we've also seen many gruesome injuries in the NBA. But nothing like the NFL. Nothing like the NFL. It's very common over the course of an NFL season for 20 to 30 players to be out for the season with an injury, whether it's a torn Achilles, torn ACL, MCL, patella tendon, etc. Spinal injuries we've seen. It's very common. And what many of these corporate factions, who for the most part are Marxists, have tried to do is use Kaepernick, who I've already spotlighted as a Monarch athlete. It's just my view of it. One of his handlers was Mr. Nate Boyer. His main handler is Miss Ness Nitty. They tried to use him, but the NFL was able to eject him out of the league, but he's still hovering around. Kaepernick is like an annoying baby mama who just won't go away. She's still trying to find a way to take command in court over frivolous shit. That's Kaepernick. Everybody knew that Kaepernick was not a starting quarterback until he started to get down on one knee. Then all of a sudden, he's the best quarterback ever. Everybody's trying to stop him from playing. Before he got down on one knee, he was viewed as a bum. He was viewed as somebody who could not lead. A lot of brothers try to give me a hard time about that. I was a big proponent of Colin Kaepernick when he first got the starting job. I was very happy to see the uprising of great black quarterbacks. There was a stretch where every year the NFC was being represented by a so-called black quarterback. It was Kaepernick, it was Russell Wilson 2 years in a row, then it was Cam Newton. It was great to see, but the bottom line of it was that Colin Kaepernick is not a leader. He's never been a leader. Never. And once he decided to become woke at the behest of whoever it was, he became stuck in that character and he cannot come out. That's why he has to maintain that huge afro. That's why every time he's seen, he has to wear a dashiki or a black leather jacket, trying to act like he's a mixture of John Shaft and Huey P. Newton. He's a character. He's playing a role. And Eric Reid is stuck in that cult of worshiping Colin Kaepernick. Eric Reid worships Colin Kaepernick. You can see it in his eyes. He's under mind control. He's bugged out of his damn mind. Well, he decided that he was going to bring a grievance against the Cincinnati Bengals because they asked him, as they were in negotiations to possibly consider signing him, whether or not he was going to continue his protest. And he felt like that was an unconstitutional question to ask. Well, an independent arbitrator came to the conclusion that there was nothing wrong with that question. So, of course, they're going to talk about it, and I'm going to chime in.
An independent arbitrator ruled the Bengals were within their rights to question whether Eric Reid would continue to kneel during the national anthem. A grievance was filed against the Bengals on behalf of Reid after Bengals owner Mike Brown reportedly asked Reid about kneeling. Reid was brought in while a free agent and was not signed by Cincinnati. Reid did sign a one-year contract with Carolina late last month. That's it for this SportsCenter right now. Here's more First Take.
There you hear it. Eric Reid's grievance against the Bengals denied by an arbitrator. Stephen A., you have an issue with this?
No, I don't. I don't have an issue with his arbitration being denied. The reality.
You shouldn't. And Stephen A. Smith, I believe, is finally starting to come to terms with the facts of the matter. And he's finally starting to get the courage to say certain things that I believe he understood from the very start. which is that this whole so-called movement is based in discordianism, is based in trying to spread and promote chaos. They have no end game. They never did. And they're basically just woke Negroes trying to see who they can harass into crying with them and allowing them to hug them. That's all this is really about. Eric Reid is clearly mentally disturbed and emotionally inept.
The reality of the situation is that Eric Reid clearly appears to be hell-bent on making noise about this issue, which he has every right to do. But I think people have misconstrued what's going on here. The reality of the situation is that I'm still a bit perturbed by what I witnessed this past weekend when he tried to go at Malcolm Jenkins on the football field. Now,
I don't know why you're perturbed by that, Stephen A. Smith. You should have expected that. You should have expected that. As soon as they allowed Eric Reid back into the NFL, you should have expected that. That's why I liken Colin Kaepernick as well as Eric Reid to a couple of malcontent baby mamas. It's like that dude who says to himself, you know what? She done cut my tires. She done thrown rocks through my window. She done called up my job trying to get me fired. But you know what? I'm going to try to make it work with her one last time for the sake of the baby. And you try to get back with that broad. And for the 1 month that y'all are back together, she makes your life nothing but a living hell. And you remember why it didn't work out in the first place. Eric Reid and Colin Kaepernick, they're never going to be what they call model citizens in the NFL. And I have no problem with cats who have a goal and decide that they're going to get and accomplish that goal by certain means that are going to make people uncomfortable. But you have to have a goal. You have to have an end game that is realistic. If your end game is equality or I want to hug, which is really just I want a hug from the white man, that's never going to happen. No other race is concerned with equality. Every other race is concerned with getting theirs and making sure that they win this race, because that's what it is. It's a competition. And when the so-called black man comes to terms with that, then you're going to get the respect, quote unquote, that you want to get from the other races by osmosis, because you're going to stop trying to be validated by their acceptance. You're going to understand that this is a competition. You have to be playing to win, not come out in a tie. So when I see people like a Colin Kaepernick, who did not even grow up with the so-called black experience, who's another mixed nut, another nut job, I'm sure a lot of people won't like that. But at the end of the day, if you have one Caucasian parent and one so-called black parent, you can't lead so-called black people. I'm sorry. You cannot.
Now, there's a lot of people within the black community that have spoken up about this, and they felt that Eric Reid was perfectly within his right to do that. I think that's utterly ridiculous.
Well, we already know the type of so-called blacks who think that Eric Reid was in his right to spaz out on Malcolm Jenkins. The same type of silly niggas who think that just because you're a high-profile so-called black person, you're a celebrity, you're supposed to give them all your money because you're the reason why they're on top, not their hard work. Not the fact that they're gifted in certain ways. You owe it to, some average Joe Negro from the hood why you're successful. All that's a play to try to justify hating, quote unquote. And as I state all the time, all a hater is somebody who spends more time worrying about what somebody else is doing as opposed to what they should be doing to bring out their own gifts. You're worried about somebody else's gifts as opposed to the gifts that you have. As opposed to putting down the weed, putting down the video game controller, and not spending money that you don't have on Air Jordans and on jewelry, etc. Knocking up women that you cannot afford to provide for, or babies that you cannot afford to provide for. Instead of doing that, you should be trying to work on that gift that you have. You're a gifted artist, you're a gifted singer, a gifted musician. You're great with tools. Instead of you trying to take that to the next level, you want to sit back and act like Floyd Mayweather and Michael Jordan and Kobe Bryant and whoever owes you something. Malcolm Jenkins, I can't believe he worked with the owners and he actually resolved something and he's trying to move to another phase. That means we can't complain anymore. That means he's a sellout. Let me go clickety-clack on Twitter. Get the fuck out of here.
The reality is that he is,
this nut job.
He feels like the issue was co-opted, but more importantly, he
feels like the issue was co-opted because his boo thing, Colin Kaepernick, cannot get the credit that he wants Colin Kaepernick to get. Eric Reid is a man worshiper, and there's nothing worse than a man worshiper, because a man worshiper always ends up being disappointed because a man will always fail you. And when that man fails you, when you're a man worshiper, you lose your mind. What little mind you have left.
He feels like more people should have stood behind Colin Kaepernick. Well, why didn't you get in everybody's face then? Because last time I checked, you could find more than 25 players that actually took a knee. The league consists of over 16 to 1,800 players in the National Football League. So a vast majority of NFL players sort of didn't take that position at all. And even the ones that did speak out, again, even though Colin Kaepernick instigated a lot of things with his willingness to protest, and as a black man, I certainly applaud that. The flip side to it is that people really...
You're only supposed to applaud gestures that are going to lead to a real resolution. Colin Kaepernick never had a plan. He never needed one. He was there to push chaos. You don't need a plan when you're there to push chaos.
Really raised holy hell once the president spoke at the rally in Huntsville, Alabama on September 22nd, 2017, saying fire all those SOBs. It was after that that Jerry Jones took a knee. It was after that that the players locked arms in unison. It was after that that everything really fomented to another level. And so when I look at it from that perspective, I just believe, with all due respect to Eric Reid, because I applaud his conscience, I applaud where he's coming from. But there's a way to handle things, and I think the manner in which he's going about handling this, for the most part, has been ill-advised and counterproductive.
Well, for the most part, the way that he's handled it has not been advised at all. Other than, possibly, maybe even probably, from Colin Kaepernick. You have to understand that whenever you have someone who's as close to Kaepernick as Eric Reid is, for him to move in that way, he had to, at worst, have gotten the co-signature of Colin Kaepernick, and at most, gotten the order from Colin Kaepernick to move in that way. All right? That is why in the aftermath of Eric Reid approaching Malcolm Jenkins in the way that he did, you got another one of those cryptic tweets from Kaepernick saying that he co-signs Eric Reid or that he agrees with Eric Reid. Why would you agree with him making an ass of himself, a spectacle of himself before the game, approaching Malcolm Jenkins, unless that was the plan the whole time?
Okay, I'm going to say some stuff that you guys have heard me say before when this subject comes up. In case people haven't heard me say it before, I want to be very clear and connect all the dots.
No, you're going to do your best to promote your normal liberal Caucasian Jew bullshit. Or as you guys call it, Olam Tikkun. Trying to bring some level of order to the world through your Kabbalah bullshit.
I just want to say that in advance. The arbitrator in this case, I can say unequivocally, was categorically incorrect in their decision. That is a bad and wrong decision. It's not a smart decision. It is not thought through, I don't think. Here's the bottom line. The Bengals asked the question of Eric Reid, are you going to kneel? Can't ask that question. I am saying right now you are not allowed to ask that question.
Explain
period.
Why. Explain why.
About to. I've talked oftentimes on this show about First Amendment protections and how they don't extend to the question is, do they extend to the workplace? Well, yes, you can say what you want. You're not going to go to jail, but you may not have a job. So they don't extend to the workplace, right? No, I'll accept that. I believe that in a way they do. In other words,
In other words, you cannot substantiate it. At the end of the day, once again, Mr. Max Kellerman, you're an agent of chaos, and I've been telling you brothers for a very, very long time. Behind the so-called liberal black man and woman is always the liberal Caucasian, particularly the liberal Caucasian Jew. This is why he's so desperate to find some level of gray area in regards to whether or not the First Amendment can protect gestures like this in a private corporate workspace. There's a saying that you can express yourself how you want in your own home. All of us have worked in corporate America jobs. We have to sit next to people every day, and you have no idea what their personal views are on politics, on religion, on gender roles, on sexuality, sexual preference, whatever. You have no idea, and you really should not care. What they're trying to do in this modern super liberal fascist ideology or atmosphere that they're trying to promote, they're trying to make everyone be as transparent as possible in regards to your beliefs. This is why it's becoming more and more commonplace for people to ask you who you're voting for or if you're voting, as if it's any of their business. We all know, and I know this for a fact, oftentimes you'll have so-called black women who will tell you, I hope that you voted today. What they really mean is, I hope that you voted Democrat. I'm sure that you brothers are familiar with this. A lot of so-called black women especially, they love to go around asking people if they have voted, especially black men. And what they really mean is, I hope that you voted Democrat. Because if it was about voting however you wanted, they wouldn't ask you. They wouldn't care. But right now, they're so charged up by Donald Trump. What they're assuming is that as a so-called black man, that you're going to think how they want you to think. They're just not going to say it expressly, because even they know not to go far enough to try to tell you who to vote for. But they're assuming as a so-called black man that if you do vote, that you're going to vote for who they want you to vote for or who they voted for. Because the so-called black woman has become the end-all, be-all in the so-called black community, at least in their minds, through the television. Point being is this. When you are part of a private corporation, yes, the so-called boss or director or the hiring authority, they have the right to inquire over whether or not you could potentially be a part of bringing an energy into their environment that's going to hurt their ability to make money. And that's why you have the owner of the Carolina Panthers, who was strategically placed as the owner to act as the plug, as the person who can bring all the super woke athletes onto his team and allow them to, quote unquote, express themselves however they like. And that's why you're going to see more and more wanton disrespect from Eric Reid until he eventually is eliminated out of the NFL.
Precondition of your employment, I do not believe your employer can tell you you must publicly parrot my political beliefs, my political speech.
No problem, Max Kellerman. So if ESPN decides that they're going to hire a neo-Nazi because his sports takes are so good, I hope that you have that same stance. Because if you're going to uphold the First Amendment, it can't just be for things that you agree with. It also has to be for things that you don't agree with. I remember a while ago, ESPN had Rush Limbaugh as one of their anchors. And he says something, quote unquote, controversial about Donovan McNabb or black quarterbacks. And they got rid of him like that. I wonder if Max Kellerman jumped to Rush Limbaugh's defense. Or if he said, you know what, good, get rid of that guy. Point being is this, I have no problem with ESPN getting rid of Rush Limbaugh. You know why? Because potentially he could have hurt their ratings with many of his takes. In the same fashion, I have no problem with an NFL team saying, I'm not going to bring on Eric Reid because he may alienate a lot of our fan base.
And if kneeling during the anthem is political speech, then so is standing. Whether or not...
No. This nut job said that standing for the national anthem is showing that you have some level of a political stance or bent or what have you. No, it's just a part of your job description. Once again, look, I've said this all the time, and many of the wokety woke black dudes, they get upset when I say this. If you're a member of the National Football League or the National Basketball Association and the national anthem is playing, if you're really in your right mind, you should be having your head down, praying to the Most High anyway. You should not even be cognizant of the words that are being played or promoted, because I have news for you. Whether you stand, kneel, get down on one knee, two knees, sit down on the ground, Indian style, the anthem is not going to stop being played. You can protest all you want. They're never going to stop with the national anthem, which is all that is that's just the corporate theme song of the United States of America. That's never going to stop being played. So if you're operating on a higher level, you understand that you're just in that environment to get what you need, move forward, and hopefully you can flip that money and invest it in something that's going to assist yourself, your family, and your so-called community. That's the point. Not to be trying to make all these frivolous protests and to try to get people to stop doing something that is never going to stop.
Common sense tells you, but we can all at least agree that we love America, right? No, that's the idea of America. That's the idea of the First Amendment. You don't have to. You don't have to say that publicly. Now, business. Here's the business argument. I've heard you make this.
Let me say this once again. There was a player for the Philadelphia Eagles. We all know who he was. Riley Cooper, former wide receiver of the Philadelphia Eagles, caught on camera letting his real spirit come out. He was at a country music concert. He said, "I'll fight every nigger here, bro." That's what he said. And I don't remember there being any pundits on ESPN saying that he had the right to express himself however he felt like expressing himself. I don't remember that. If I'm wrong about that, one of you brothers can correct me. My point is this. When you have somebody like a Max Kellerman who's trying to use the quote-unquote First Amendment defense, you have to be very careful of the precedent that sets, because he's not being sincere. He's being completely disingenuous to try to put a battery in the back of so-called black people to promote chaos. And ever since the so-called super liberal Caucasian Jew has had his hand in the backs of the more prominent so-called black people, so-called black leaders, we've seen what has ensued. The woman over the man, the child over the adult, and the incarceration rates and the abortion rates in our so-called communities have skyrocketed. All right? Super liberal Caucasians, especially super liberal Caucasian Jews, once again, they're like that quote-unquote cool parent who lets you stay up all night and eat ice cream and candy and, do whatever you want, stay out till 3 a.m. But when your life turns out bad, they're never there for you. They're never there for you because they're the ones who set you up for failure because they did not provide the proper structure and order that was needed. So you have to be very, very careful when you listen to people like a Max Kellerman who says things that sound good. Yeah, it sounds good if you have the mind of a child. But if you comprehend on the level of an adult, you realize that he's setting you up for failure.
In this case, Will, I've also heard you allude to this. Bad for business. They have a right to know. He's not an incredible player. He's just a good player. So is it going to be worth the distraction? Can't they ask that question? The answer is no. Number one, the business issue. A Southern diner owner in the 60s might say, look, I don't have no problem serving black people, but it's bad for business. But you know what the court said back then? And they were right. There are higher principles here. That it is the First Amendment for a reason. No, you can't not serve them. Well, I'm talking about speech.
You said the court.
Let me say this very quickly, because Max Kellerman, he's trying to conflate various issues, and of course he's going to try to run to the quote-unquote racial issues of the 1950s. The so-called separate but equal mentality, that was substantiated by judicial rulings like Plessy versus Ferguson. All right, separate but equal. Also the Jim Crow laws. So laws had to be overturned. You understand? Laws had to be overturned so that so-called black people would have the right to not be victimized just because of their so-called race. That has nothing to do with kneeling for the national anthem. Just to compare those things is an insult to the so-called black people who had to live through that time period. Okay? One has nothing to do with the other. But he's trying to conflate the two to make Kaepernick and Eric Reid sympathetic figures, and all they are attention mongers. That's all they are. The real issues with our community is that our people, we have no sense of culture. So because we have no sense of culture, we have no standpoint of strength. Kaepernick is not a leader. He's somebody who's being used. He's a pawn and he's an image. That's it. But once again, Max Kellerman is trying to make it look like, oh, well, the diner owners down south, they could just say we don't want to have blacks here. The reason why they could do that is because there were laws that promoted that, known as the Jim Crow laws. All right. It wasn't just that they could do whatever they wanted.
Court said that no, you can't ask that question, correct?
Thank you, sir.
Correct?
Hold on. I'm going to get to that.
I'm asking you. But
wait. But I'm still developing.
All right.
Hold on. So the answer is business doesn't always work here. And let me give you an example here as it relates to, as an answer for why you're allowed to discriminate. Mm-hmm. And let me give you a more direct analogy. If you are applying to rent an apartment, for example, you know what they can't ask you? Are you gay? They can't ask you that even if they turn down your application and they say, yes, but your answer to that question had nothing to do with it. The idea that they just asked the question and they could turn around and say, well, that's not why we didn't hire you. It doesn't work because once you ask the question, it has the appearance that that's what you were after.
Look at Max Kellerman's face. He looks like such a damn nut job. And once again, he's trying to obfuscate the issue. The reason why you're not allowed to ask someone what their sexual orientation is when they're putting forth an application to live in an apartment is because there are civil rights laws that are there to protect them. In regards to the NFL players, you do have the right to ask them if they plan on doing something that could hurt your bottom line somewhere down the line. You do have that right because they are going to be employees of yours. When you're going to rent an apartment, that person is not an employee of yours. So those are two totally different things.
and some protections are extended to the workplace. And I believe, and I think anyone who really thinks this through will agree with me.
Oh, there we
That's
go.
That's right. You got it.
Yeah, as usual, when you disagree with Max Kellerman, it's because your cognitive function is not up to par. That's normal, super liberal, nonsense, jargon. The only reason why you don't understand what I'm saying is because, you're not quite up to par with me when it comes to my mental faculties.
You got to think it through.
There we go. So in other words, somebody who doesn't agree with you didn't think it through.
Correct.
So that's the problem.
That is
that's
exactly
the problem
what I'm
right
saying.
there. That's the problem right
That's
there.
exactly what
That's
I'm
the
saying.
problem right there, and that's ridiculous. But go ahead. Go ahead, finish your point. That's ridiculous.
That
okay.
Your employer in the NFL cannot make as a precondition of your employment the parroting publicly of their political speech.
Well, before you chime in, here's where I want to address you.
That's only based on the presumption that the reason why the quote-unquote owner is not going to bring you onto his team is because he even has any political association or affiliation. Most of these owners are billionaires. They could care less whether you're a so-called Democrat or a Republican. So when you use that term politics, that is what is intrinsic in that term, that you're either a Democrat or a Republican. Now, the issue that you're having, Max Kellerman, is ideological. It's not political. The ideology of Eric Reid is totally bent on something that's going to hurt the bottom line of the owner. And they do have the right to ask those questions based on image. That's why I used the comparison of Rush Limbaugh or even Riley Cooper, who I'm sure that Max Kellerman had no issue with either one of them no longer being associated with ESPN or the NFL respectively. So that's how you know that he's not being real about it, because the only time that you see him talk or hear him speak with this type of passion is to promote chaos.
When you keep using that word parroting, you act like they're asking somebody to imitate their behavior and their beliefs. That's not what.
Thank you, sir.
What they're doing. That would be parroting. What I believe they're saying is that we believe this is harmful for our business if you do that. And because if you do that, that's going to be harmful to our business, we have the right as an owner, an executive, or whatever, to make the call. That's not asking you to parrot their political beliefs. That's saying we don't want you to get in the way of our bottom line. Now, whether we...
Simple as that. And I've been saying this for the last 2 years. Good for you, sir. You're finally starting to get to the point where I won't say that you understand it, but you have the courage to say it on television.
Whether we agree or disagree, let's say, for example, hypothetically, real quick, Will, hypothetically, let's just say, for example, a higher court agreed with Eric Reid. And if it's by a 5-4 vote, let's just hypothetically say it went to the Supreme Court, and they won by a 5-4 vote. Well, then that would mean four judges voted in favor of the owner and 5 voted against them. So when you sit up there and say, well, excuse me, the higher courts, this is the belief that they have, and this is what they're doing. Well, it depends. There's always a bevy of different angles, a bevy of different opinions that come into the fray. In the end, my biggest issue with you is you keep harping on the parroting element. And I'm saying that's not what they're doing.
Because Max Kellerman is still stuck down that binary political rabbit hole. And I get a lot of these wokey-woke black dudes who have the same issue whenever I use that term liberal. Oh, well, so what are you saying? So you saying that you for the Republicans or for the conservatives? Because you know how these dudes are. A lot of these guys, they've never been taught what this society is actually about. So with them, everything is liberal versus conservative, Democrat versus Republican. They've never been taught to see things on a certain level so that we understand what power is. Power is making these political factions come to you, not you going to them. That's why the Democrats, they have no respect for you. Basically, the Democratic credo is, we're going to help you get more crumbs, black man. That's their credo. We're going to assist you in getting more crumbs so you can continue to be lazy-minded. Okay? You're not supposed to be associated with any political party as a so-called black man because none of them have your best interests at heart. In regards to Stephen A. Smith's assessment of Max Kellerman's verbiage, he's on point, he's right and exact. Max Kellerman right now is still upset that Donald Trump is in office. But I think that Stephen A. Smith's argument would have been more potent if he would have brought up more relevant examples to prove to Max Kellerman that he's not even sincere in what he's trying to put forth. Because if you really were that concerned about people's right to express themselves, that means you have to be concerned all across the board. What that means is that you have to allow people like a Riley Cooper, like a Rush Limbaugh, to speak their mind, and to have the right to make certain quote unquote mistakes and still remain enfranchised with their corporation. As we all know, Max Kellerman is not going to, be part and parcel of that. And I have no problem with that. But then be consistent all across the board, because at the end of the day, Riley Cooper was going to be an issue that was going to separate the Eagles locker room. He was going to be an issue in the NFL. Rush Limbaugh would have hurt their ratings in the long run, making a lot of his statements. So I have no problem with them getting rid of those two type of people from their respective corporations. So you have to have the same understanding with an Eric Reid, with a Colin Kaepernick.
Let me say this really quickly, Max, because I think Stephen A. has actually just absolutely nailed this. The reason you're wrong is because you're presuming at this moment it's a constitutional question. You're presuming that this is a 5-4 decision of the Supreme Court. This is an arbitrator interpreting the collective bargaining agreement of the NFL. And the arbitrator is saying, you know what? Kneeling for the national anthem isn't the same thing as asking someone's sexuality. It isn't the same thing as asking someone's religion.
But it obviously is. That's my point.
Max, in order for you to be right in this debate, you need the Supreme Court of the United States to back you up.
No, I don't.
Until they do, this arbitrator is right.
No, I don't need anyone to back me up. It's just pure reason. Of course it is. If we agree that he's making a political statement by not standing for the anthem, then that is political speech.
Well, we don't agree with that, because he's not making a political statement. He's making an ideological statement. According to him, the reason why they started kneeling was because of quote-unquote police brutality. The police brutality issue is not a political issue. As a matter of fact, they've gone above and beyond to say that their protest has nothing to do with the flag. That's what they themselves have said. So for you to state that what they're doing is political, what you're saying is that their protest is about the flag and the national anthem. We've heard for over a year that the reason why they were kneeling was because they thought that that was going to bring attention to police brutality. Now you're telling me that they're kneeling during the national anthem because they're making a political statement. So everything that you're saying is based off of pretense and nothing of substance, based on the words of Colin Kaepernick and Eric Reid.
Therefore, standing for the anthem must necessarily also be political speech. So him standing for it as a precondition for employment is absolutely, and by definition, is employer saying, you say what I say or else.
As someone who has spoken to a couple of owners directly on this matter, they are quick to remind me, because they watch this show, they're quick to remind me they won't think about politics at all.
Thank you, sir. And when you're making that much money as these owners, these billionaires, they're not that concerned with politics. As a matter of fact, they tell the politicians what they want from them. And that's my point to so-called black people. You guys keep voting for politicians who supposedly are going to save you. That's why for you brothers out there, when these liberal black women start telling you about, I hope you voted today and who did you vote for, you should tell them to mind your damn business. When our people get strong enough culturally to tell politicians what they better do, then you could be fully engrafted and invested in politics. Until then, there's nothing that a politician is going to do that's going to help us at all, especially as so-called black men.
What they're saying is, excuse me, when we noticed in our eyes that our bottom line was potentially negatively being affected, we became fearful of that, and as a result, we are mindful of it, so we don't want somebody who's affecting our bottom line. Again,
I'm not saying it's conscious or intentional.
But you're implying that it is, Max, because the point is that as businessmen, I don't agree with their decision. I don't agree with Eric Reid being ostracized.
Yes, you do, sir. Stephen A. Smith, stop lying. If you were a billionaire and you owned a football team and you thought, if you even thought that there were certain components of your corporation that were affecting your bottom line, you would have them removed expeditiously. There's no doubt about that. And I don't care what type of corporation you work in. That's why you get evaluated quarterly or, 3 times per year. They evaluate you because they want to know if you're bringing forth the level of work, the level of proficiency that they're paying you for. Because if you're not, they remove you. That's the bottom line. So if you're a player in the NFL, not only are you going to be evaluated based off of, your output, what they expect from you, but also what you're doing off the field. Why do you think Le'Veon Bell has had such a hard time getting the money that he wants from the Steelers? It's not because he's not the best running back in the NFL. It's because he's gotten caught using weed a few times. He's gotten some major injuries. And he's also somebody who can be a little bit of a hardhead off the field. So all these things come into play. They always have.
I don't agree with Colin Kaepernick certainly being ostracized with the garbage that I see playing football in the National Football League at the quarterback position.
And Colin Kaepernick is garbage too.
But what I'm saying is, if you are a businessman and you own a product and you believe that bottom line is going to be compromised, you have a right as that businessman to say, I don't think this is good for my business.
Not
without you saying political parody.
I am willing to believe some owners, it wasn't even on their mind what I'm saying. Nevertheless, the principle remains. Would it be okay for a Southern store owner to say, I'm not even looking at black or white. All I know is my business is down because I served that black man at my counter. And in this community...
No, so actually it would be okay as long as he had the laws to back him up. A lot of people might not understand what I'm saying right now. But the reason why it no longer became okay for those business owners to deny blacks was because there were laws that were incrementally passed to stop them from doing so. Or because of the assistance of the as above, so below dichotomy, where they were utilizing the Hegelian dialectic to put pressure on the U.S. Supreme Court and the other branches of U.S. government, where you actually had police that were assisting some of the Marxist pawns like A. Philip Randolph and Martin Luther King, as well as certain strategically placed media members that were assisting them to provide pressure from above and below. That's what caused the change in society. It wasn't because they were guilt-tripped. These business owners down south, they were not guilt-tripped into allowing blacks to eat at their kitchen counters and stuff like that. So he's trying to create this false narrative. Laws got changed. That's why people were forced to allow so-called blacks to eat in their diners. So in order for what you're saying to be something of substance, the NFL is going to have to change a law that will stop them from being able to ask questions about whether or not players can quote unquote protest the national anthem. But that would be very strange because according to the protesters, they're not protesting the national anthem. That's what I'm saying. What Max Kellerman is saying has really no credibility. And I'm surprised that Stephen A. Smith has not caught him on this. Because according to Max, these players are making political statements by getting down on one knee. How could they be making a political statement when, according to them, what they're protesting is not political? What they're protesting is treatment from the various police departments, according to them.
I lose business. Is that a good enough reason for them not to serve a black man?
No, Max, but there's a historical perspective that you are ignoring. Historically, black people were treated a certain way, which was why we could make that case and take it to the highest court.
Why do you think they're kneeling?
Max, you going someplace you don't need to go, my brother.
Thank you, sir. But you know what, Stephen A. Smith? You've allowed him to feel so comfortable. And this happens a lot, where people of other races think that they could tell so-called blacks how they're supposed to view and feel about black issues. That's why you have to put their asses in their place immediately. If you're not a so-called black person, do never ever in your fucking life try to tell me about a black issue and what I'm supposed to think. Because I promise you, I'm gonna rip your fucking throat out. Do not ever tell me about how I'm supposed to view a black issue. All right? When you come on my channel, mind your business. My channel is a pro-truth channel geared towards the so-called black man. Do not get involved. I don't care about your view on nothing involving so-called black men or black people at all. This is our problem. We got to deal with it.
Brother, the fact of the matter is that ain't the same thing as a guy who was getting paid $12 million to play football, being on a football field, wearing my uniform, and choosing to take a knee on the field during the national anthem.
That does not have a price tag. We got to go. The price tag. This debate obviously will continue to go on. It has for quite some time. We got to go because we have a big guest coming up.
But anyway, that's basically it on that. We'll see how things turn out with this whole Eric Reid situation. So peace.